Hey everyone. I wanted to get back into the topic involving energetics here, using something that's kind of personal and I guess you could say experiential as an example. I spent a lot of time in my career. I was 20 years in the wireless industry before I left it. And when I did, I started to use a lot of the knowledge I had from that industry to do research involving maps. I was specifically studying the concept of ley lines, energy lines, or what some people call matrix grids. These are effectively energized um, Earth energies. That's the wrong way to put it. These are lines that follow a specific trajectory around the Earth that are charged with energy. What does that mean? Some people call that energy orgone, for example. That's one way you could talk about it. These are things that you can measure because there'll be fluctuations involving extremely low frequency and other types of signals. And these are all measurable signals. There's also things that are called life meters that you can measure this with. So these are tangible, provable concepts. Okay. I didn't used to believe in these things. It wasn't until I really took the time to study it that I realized that, wow, there's really something to this. And I was really getting a lot of reminders of it lately, specifically the power of faith and the power of, I guess you could say, love as an energy source, comparative to the extreme emotions of hatred and trauma. And one of the examples that helped remind me of this was in my work experience. I used to design cell towers. For a while, I maintained them also, and I also did optimization. But specifically, I was doing design for about 7 years, meaning that I had the software that I would run and that I would actually decide, where antennas pointed and how tall the tower was going to be and things like that. And one of the last projects that I worked on while I was still doing that job was in an area called Joseph, Oregon, near Enterprise, Oregon, as well as an area called Wallowa Lake. I talked a little bit about this inside an interview I did on the Basis project. There was this song that kept on repeating in my head, and I didn't understand entirely where it came from. I mean, I kind of do, but it's effectively where I had this rhythm kind of going where I was thinking, Mars, Mars, hum, hum, will allow awake. Mars, 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 hum, hum, will allow awake. And I don't know why I couldn't get this out of my head. But for some reason, when I kind of hummed along to it and I thought about it, it just kind of brought me this sort of internal peace. And it has kind of a Native American tribal rhythm to it. It's like the kind of thing you would almost see them marching and, on the earth and dancing around and things like that. It just felt like that to me. And so I was studying the Fibonacci sequence relative to some more negative events in our country's history, like the Zodiac crimes, which appeared to be anchoring, I guess you could say, sacrifice and murder to the Fibonacci sequence by using the numerology of the Fibonacci sequence and the patterning of the Fibonacci sequence to perform ritual sacrifice. I don't want to go into that topic right now, but it's necessary to help people kind of understand why I believe so much, I guess you could say, in the power of demonstrating faith and love and feeling love for one another, and what a powerful force that is in the universe. That it's more than just something that you're sensing and feeling, it's an actual energy. It's a measurable, tangible energy. How is that tangible and measurable? Well, your brain waves. You have an EEG, electroencephalograph, that you can measure that with. There's also devices like life meters. There's all kinds of different equipment that can effectively measure emissions of what some people, or like Wilhelm Reich, for example, called orgone. And some people, and I'm not sure I entirely agree with this, would classify things like positive orgone radiation as being more of a loving energy, deadly orgone radiation as being more of a, I guess you could say, a negative energy. But I feel like that's oversimplifying it. And I think that a little bit of that is um, our inability to see things as more clockwise, counterclockwise, forward and backward, but in the sense that these are all, I guess you could say, necessary energies. Competing, well, not competing energies. It's just the way we structure our reality. You hear me talk a lot about spheres of influence and spherical grids and circular grids. It's because your brain and each hemisphere emits a waveform, and you have a pattern that's emitted that's the product of your two hemispheres of your brain, which forms the vesica Pisces. If you're not familiar with that concept, look it up, or I'll provide a slide for it. But it looks a lot like a DNA coil. Some people associate it with the Jesus fish, if you're familiar with that symbol. And I was thinking about it in terms of the weird things that I was experiencing, where there was all these strange synchronicities to my information. Um, Things like you're running an angle from one place to the next, and it turns out to be like your birthday or the birthday of somebody that you love or care about. Things like that. That was happening to me. I was finding pyramid structures around the world and studying ancient pyramids and their alignments. Where are they facing? I was using my map experience to find out where do the edges of the pyramid point towards. When you run a line from those pyramids, where do they go to? So some of my research has landed me not only in places like Egypt, where we all know that there's pyramids, but places like the Bosnian Pyramid, the Pyramid of the Sun there, Teotihuacan, I always screw that up, in Mexico, um, the Pyramid of the Sun there. And learning more from people, other researchers, for example, that have basically been telling us that there's alignments, and I know a lot of people know this already, but there's alignments to the sun and the moon within the solar system to these pyramids. And so, again, some people kind of mock that or make fun of it, but in all actuality, it's what I'm learning is it's the only true science that's worth knowing, and it involves energetics. The interaction between our thoughts, our feelings, and how that affects everything around us, not just each other's behavior, but events. It actually structures events and structures reality. I learned in my experience, in my, I guess you could say, in my pulling documents off of the Freedom of Information Act library involving energetics, that there's quite a number of people who are in the school of thought that there is no solid matter, that what we exist in is a perception. I've now learned that that's basically the truth, and I can explain it in more detail in more articles, and I already kind of have, but um, it's really became super obvious to me as I was, as you can see in the slide here, I was studying places like the Bosnian Pyramid, houses that I lived in that I'm aware were on energy centers where there was charged energy and energy lines. Places that I had visited, like Portland, Oregon, for example. I used to go hiking with somebody that I cared about deeply quite often, and we would go to different parts of Portland. And I learned that some of these areas that we were drawn to organically were energy centers. They were charged with energy. They were sometimes former volcanoes, places like Mount Tabor in Portland, Oregon. Um, there's um, there's an area where I got engaged at one time called Hug Point. I found a pyramidal structure there. It aligns with things in ways that I can't explain. And then out in Wallowa Lake, an area where I spent a lot of time just on the soil and on the ground doing research for designing a cell tower. But I also spent time there, with a coworker that I also admired and respected quite a bit, and we just had a lot of good times. We enjoyed what we did. Maybe not always aware of how energy affects people. That's a whole nother topic. I don't design cell towers anymore, and I left the industry just because I've been concerned about emissions of orgone relative to the way certain technologies work. And what became really obvious to me that this is all something that's tangible and real was that as I was performing these alignments in pyramids that were clear across the world, like the Bosnian Pyramid, it was really, really strange how there was alignments from a pyramid like that to the area that I spent time in, like Wallowa Lake. It wasn't just that one, it's that my childhood home that's hundreds of miles away from there also aligned with Wallowa Lake. There was peaks and ridges and mountaintops and lakes that were aligning with places that I was born or spent a lot of time in. In addition to that, I've also been studying Freemasonry not within it, mind you, from a distance. I don't join anything like that. And I don't have a problem with them or anything like that. I just study it from a distance without judgment at a purely energetic level. And I just started noticing that quite a few of these Masonic lodges, specifically the one near Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which is another place where I grew up, also had alignments to Wallowa Lake. So, there struck me as something really strange here that not only were these lines that were at 33 degrees and 303 degrees lining up with Wallowa Lake, or that were, running clear across or hundreds of miles or thousands of miles from across the earth, but they specifically lined up with each other. They were actually intersecting at Wallowa Lake. I was like, gosh, like that's really, like, my jaw dropped. I'm like, why are all these energy lines seem to go right to this very small area here where there's just one lake and just a few mountain peaks out in rural eastern Oregon? Well, I started studying the area a little bit better. I was already familiar with Chief Joseph to a degree, but this is an area that experienced a lot of trauma. Um, there was people that had their land taken from them there, and they were pushed out, and they had to leave. And I think when you've spent a lot of time building an area and it's close to you, and you're forced to leave, that trauma stays anchored in the soil, the same way that the reason why they perform sacrifice on hilltops or whatever else, they also do in these other areas that have energy centers, because they literally have understood that the interaction between your blood and your plasma, both as the actual fluid form of it and the etheric form of it as bioplasma or chi or orgone or prana or whatever you want to call it, it all has an effect on the earth grid and structures reality, specific to the locations where it occurs at. So as I was running these lines and I was seeing how they lined up, what I started to do was place pinpoints. As you can see on the map here, I placed pinpoints between locations like that where they lined up, so they would cross in to the area, and they would come in from different regions, sometimes thousands of miles away, all into this little area, and the intersections of them I placed pinpoints at. And I started noticing that beginning at the Mount Howard at the very top of the peak, then leading down to the tower that I helped construct and design, then back up to Wallowa Peak, back up to Sacagawea Peak, then to Anaroy Mountain. Okay, that formed the center of this Fibonacci sequence spiral. And then I saw that it moved on to where the Altai region of Russia has I guess a rock structure that is known to be an energy center, where it's very, very heavily charged with energy, and it has an influence on the grid globally. And it had an alignment with the Bosnian Pyramid as well as the Richland Free Masonic Lodge. All three lined up to that specific pinpoint. Then I moved on to the next part of the Fibonacci spiral, and it was my childhood home, also crossing with the Bosnian Pyramid at 330 degrees. Again, these are always lines that are either 33 or 303, or if they run in the opposite direction, it's 123 and 213. But it's always the same numbers, okay? So how does this structure our reality? Nearly all these numbers are part of the Fibonacci number, which goes 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 5, 5, 8, 8, 13, 13, 21, 21. And so this pattern is in the Nautilus shell. It's part of sacred geometry. It's basically in everything, okay? And so when I moved on to the next point, it was, again, lined up with a hug point pyramid looking structure, and that's an area where I got engaged when I ran a line towards it, and that lined up to my birth home as well. So it also lines up at the actual hug point with my birth home, and then when you go in the other direction of the other energy line, it lines up with Wallowa Lake. So again, my head was just like one, I couldn't believe it. And then it lined up again with Mount Tabor, which is in Portland, Oregon. And then there's a reflector wall that I noticed that was nearby also, that I had a marker on that it lined up with too. And when I placed all these pinpoints down, it formed the Fibonacci spiral. So to me, I started realizing that, yeah, this pattern is in everything. It's in nature, it's in the shell, it's in the nautilus, it's in everything. You'll find this pattern in repetition constantly. And then I started asking myself, well, how did this happen? Well, I think a part of it was just simply that I just experienced such strong emotions surrounding that were mostly loving, that it seemed to me like it almost was this combination of the love I felt, the strong sense of, just feeling good and being happy, that was something that I experienced there, but I'm also conscious and aware that it's an area that's heavily charged with this trauma. And I started thinking about that as a yin and a yang a little bit, energy, clockwise, counterclockwise, things like that. And I was really tapping into something that is forming the fabric of life and what we exist in. So when we think about this term, thoughts become things, and earth energy relative to human energy, I guess what I'm trying to do for people is to help you understand, and maybe I'm not explaining this well, but I hope I am, that that we are in fact lined up with these matrix and ley line grid energies. They're all across the world, and there's people that really do understand this deeply. They exploit those energy lines and those pyramidal structures oftentimes for negative purposes with negative intentions, or they'll do things in aid of creating distractions just to either malign those monuments, change their energies, or eradicate the monuments that exist that are providing those energies to the earth grid. And a lot of those energies are healing. You'll hear people, for example, that go into the Bosnian Pyramid and they gain their sight back. That was like, they don't need their glasses suddenly, or they've had backaches and things like that, and suddenly they don't feel it anymore. These are the types of reports you hear. Okay, and that really affected me. I'm like, wow, I've been so focused on these things involving the Fibonacci sequence relative to like the zodiac crimes, that then I got exposed to a whole different form of how this has been impacted. And it was mostly just through that sense of pride I had in what I was doing when I was doing it, or the relationship that I was in and how good I felt about that, about my partner and what we were accomplishing at the time, that these all had an impact on the energy grid. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. And so when I became aware that this is more than just some, new age concept or something that people say to feel good, that it's actually a practicable, I guess you could say, you can actually do energy work at these places, where if you meditate and pray, or you just simply you exist in love, or you focus on and you concentrate on as a collective group, or even just one other person, it's the strength of that energy and how much it feeds into those energy lines relative to the pyramidal structures, which radiate globally. Your brain waves are extremely low frequency. Extremely low frequency can travel for thousands of miles and make multiple trips around the globe. Okay, all ELF can do this. And so while we're all focused on the negative aspects of these technologies that involve ELF, I would just like to remind people right now, especially, that you have an enormous ability to affect things for the better by tapping into the concept of the Fibonacci spiral, sacred geometry relative to the Nautilus, and by genuinely feeling love and acceptance and putting that into the area that you wish to change things in. And one of the reasons why people will constantly try to throw you off of that, or to try to make you feel negative, oftentimes, the ones that are high level, I guess you could say, energy workers for negative outcomes, they will try to steer you away from this informational set and try to get you angry, or to try to prime you to be hating instead of loving. And so I learned that there is a spiritual battle that's going on right now that involves energetics and bioenergetics that is 100% real. And the people that know this are really working to keep us in that negative mind state, and they're going overtime right now especially. So using this as an example, just to examine this slide, and I want to remind you that, again, this spiral formed by me studying pyramidal energies globally that come from areas like Bosnia, Russia, places that I was growing up, like Woodinville, Washington, places that I lived, like Portland, Oregon, coastal locations that I spent time on with people that I cared about and loved, that are near, like Astoria, Oregon, Hug Point, Manzanita, the coastal parts of Oregon. And then how all of those lines that intersected from those areas, combined with the energy work that's done through Freemasonic lodges to charge those lines, however they do it, that when you combine that with their intersecting points, which were things like Wallowa Peak and Sacagawea Peak and Aneroy Mountain, those are energy centers that all intersected seemingly by random, but did they? That's what's so trippy about this to me. And it felt like such a miracle. It felt like I get goosebumps thinking about it right now. That I really understand now, and I hope that others will understand, and I hope that if this piece doesn't do it, that the ones I'm going to do soon will explain it better. That we understand the power of simply holding each other's hands, looking each other in the eye, accepting each other, loving each other, hugging one another. I want you to think about how that feels when it's happening. And I want you to focus on that love the way that I have and how good it's made me feel historically. I mean, it's always made me, especially some of the people that I experience this with, like they 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 loved me in ways, or they respected me in ways, or we got along in ways like I've never had with any other people in my life. And I experienced that in all ranges. Sometimes it was a coworker, sometimes it was my partner, and it all affected this area. And I'm like, wow, that's really heavy. That's amazing. And as I became aware of that, I really wanted to use that for good and focus on that and maintain that loving vibration to affect all the areas that I go to. And I now understand why these spiritual leaders, these people that have had, um, you know, got people like Gandhi, for example, or there's people that just sort of just encourage this acceptance and love, and some people thought that is weak, and I would argue that it's well, like they say, love is the province of the brave. Wasn't that the same man? It really is. Love is the province of the brave, and if you can overcome challenging circumstances where you're being provoked into hatred, provoked into anger, and just try to find somebody nearby that you care about, or that you love, or that you're capable of, or even just reaching across the aisle to somebody to say that you're going to try. It just has an amazing effect on the earth energy grid, and it can change things exponentially for the better. And I'm going to get more into this topic and discuss the energy lines, I think, in greater detail another point. But I just wanted to leave you with that thought a little bit, to tell you that when you see people that are just doing things that are more in the spirit of dancing and and celebrating the moment, those are the strongest people out there. Those are the ones that are really having a strong effect on the energy grid, and they're tapping into pyramidal energy. They're tapping into ley lines, especially if they do it in certain locations. And they are your spiritual warriors. Those are the people that are in the fight for love, and that's what's going to bring us to peace. That's what's going to bring us to mutual respect. It's going to solve a lot of these problems exponentially. It really can, guys. And I'm a 20-year radio frequency engineer, okay? I don't believe in things just to believe in them or because it, quote, feels good. I measure it. I go out and find the readings. I go out and learn the truth. And when I went out and measured things and started learning the truth, I realized that this is 100% true. Energetics is everything. And it is a spiritual battle, but you don't have to think of it as a battle, because it's really fun to stay in love, to be in love, to express love, to hug each other. And there's nothing wrong with that, even if you're facing some really serious circumstances. I would say do whatever you can right now to use this energy to affect things globally. I'm going to remind you, especially in Washington, D.C., there's an obelisk called the Washington Monument. If you look into my other research, you'll notice that that obelisk has an alignment at 33 degrees, and it goes to Moscow. Trippy, right? The capital of our country lines up with the capital of Moscow. To me, that's just amazing when I think about that. That's a country clear across the world. They were built in completely different times, right? They're structured out, yet they still have an alignment at 33 degrees. And then when I was studying the Bosnian Pyramid, I was finding similar 33 and 303 and 330 type alignments. So a lot of people want you to believe that that number has some other connotation, and it has been repurposed. But I'll also remind you that it was used by ancient civilizations to do pyramidal alignments, and that right now, if you understand that and you know how to tap into pyramidal energy and earth energy and ley line energy, and you can do it in a loving vibration, feeling it genuinely, sing your favorite song, dance with each other, and affect the energy grid for the better. Do it, think of it as a spiritual battle to spread that love and that acceptance around the world, because you have the power to do it. And especially when you all get together and you agree to do it in a crowd, it changes things exponentially and you get the solutions that you're looking for. So thank you for listening, and I hope this was educational. And I love you. I really do. I love all of you. That's just how I feel now. Thank you.